why do people take EFL exams? So every year, millions of people, literally millions, so students and professionals alike, take an official EFL exam. So many reasons behind that. It could be to improve their employment prospects. It could also mean that they can access reputable leading academic institutions. They can obtain a visa, access grants and student mobility, and many other reasons. So what we're looking at are internationally recognized exams. So if you sit one of these exams, if you take one of these exams, you will receive a very detailed breakdown of your grade. You'll receive what they call a score, a scale score, by a skill. So for reading, you'll receive a scale score, for listening another, for speaking and writing also. So that detailed breakdown of your grade alongside the actual certificate and the overall grade is something that academic and professional institutions appreciate. So as we've just seen, there are many tests out there, many qualifications out there for test takers to gauge their language abilities. Lots of tests are discontinued, new tests appear, the old tests remain, but there are changes that appear each year. Some of the exams are now more affordable, they've become more flexible, more specialised, and therefore you'll notice that there are exam centres everywhere, and you can pretty much sit an exam last minute. With most exams, I mean, for Cambridge exams you have to still book in advance, but for TEFL, for example, which is an internet-based test, you can pretty much book 1 or 2 weeks before taking the test. So it's very flexible. If you fail a test and you need that test to access a grant, or because you're starting your degree abroad and you need it to prove that you have the required level of English, you can always resit an exam last minute. So there are paper-based tests. There aren't that many anymore. They generally tend to be computer and internet-based exams, because they can then provide you with results within 48 hours in some cases, or within 1 to 2 weeks. So it's much faster, it's much more practical, much more dynamic. And there are lots of courses out there. So as a training program, we often say to people, well, why don't you specialize in exam prep? Because it's always something that you're going to use. Whether a new exam appears, an old one disappears, it's the same approach that you'll be using as a teacher to help your learners with developing their language abilities. So preparing for an exam, we say preparing because not every student that comes to you is actually going to take the test. Some people will sign up for the test, register, and then come to you, 4 weeks before and say, oh my God, I've signed up for this exam, I'm not ready. So you have to prepare them. Others will start a general course and then say, oh, I'm interested in a test, which one do you recommend? And then they might start preparing for a test. And others will just come in straight away and say, look, I want to prepare for this test, and whenever I'm ready, I'll start doing the practice test, the mock exams, and then I'll register for the actual test. So preparing is a good way of setting short to medium term goals with your learners. It incentivizes the learning process. It also helps them set feasible goals and milestones, but also sometimes a deadline if and when they've already registered. And it really helps them, it pushes them towards a higher level. So rather than just say, oh, it would be nice to have a B2 level of English, they say, well, I want to obtain this level within the next 2 years or within the next year. And then as a teacher, you'll be there to tutor them and help them gradually improve the 4 skills and format them so that they get used to how quizzes are presented, how they will be assessed in the 4 different language skills, and help them build gradually their vocabulary, their grammar, and build all these different blocks which will help them succeed the day of the exam, but also simply improve their real life English, because that's what exams should be for. It should be to improve your English for day-to-day situations, but also work and study. So going back to the profile of these millions of people that take an exam each year, we mentioned professionals and students. Now, professionals take exams such as the, let's say, CPE or CAE, the very high level tests of English of Cambridge. Why would they take those exams? Well, there are various scenarios. Some people just want to boost their CV because they know that in the near future they'll be looking for another job and they don't have an official way to prove that they have that level, those skills in English. So that's one way of doing it. So to improve the CV and also prepare for job interviews, they would sit that particular exam. If not, that we're looking at promotions. If you teach, let's say in high school or college in Spain, you want to move around, you want to access a promotion, you want to change region, you want to teach a different subject or several subjects, then you have the possibility to do so by sitting different exams and applying. So if you have, let's say, the CPE and you apply for that new position, you're more likely to obtain it. So that's another reason. And yeah, I mean, there are other scenarios that apply. For example, you're a doctor. Let's say you're a doctor from Italy and you wish to practice in the UK. Well, then the NHS, if that's whom you're hoping to work for, the NHS will say, yes, we can take you, but you need to obtain an 8 or an 8.5 out of 9 in the academic IELTS. So then that doctor would then go and prepare for the IELTS, take the exam, and present the NHS with proof of their level of proficiency in English. Now let's look at students. Why do students take EFL exams? Well, there are different scenarios once more. There's visas, student mobility, but also if, let's say, you're French and you wish to study in a UK university, you will have to sit the TEFL or the IELTS, depending on the university, but also the degree. If you're entering at bachelor's or a master's degree level, you'll be asked to prove that you have a 5.5 or a 7.5 out of 9 in IELTS, or a high score in TEFL, which could be anything between 85 and 110 out of 120 for the IBT TEFL, so the internet-based test. So that's one of the reasons, it's to study in an English-speaking country, but also, and it's quite common nowadays for MBAs to request a high level of English because some of the lectures are given in English. So if you were to apply for an MBA in, I don't know, let's say in Italy, and some of the lectures are in English, then they will ask for you to take the IELTS or the TEFL to prove that you have a high enough level to follow the lectures, take notes, and submit certain assignments in English. So what do EFL exams help learners with? Well, you can really learn a language in a less formal way, but preparing for a test is a good way of really perfecting your skills. You can learn how to write an email. So let's say you're that person at work who says, oh my God, I have to write an email in English. Oh, it's really hard. Well, having to prepare for the FCE, the CAE, the IELTS, or the TEFL really literally obliges you to improve your formal English writing. Now, by doing so, you're not only improving your vocabulary, but you're also organizing your thoughts. You're learning how to write a piece of formal writing, how to produce a piece of formal writing. But you'll also learn how to summarize. You'll also learn how to write a report, an essay. All these things help for deeper understanding of the language. You'll also improve your speaking, your listening, and your reading, because you have to learn how to take notes. You can't just understand one accent. I've heard this many times from students who've said to me, oh, I don't understand your accent. I only understand the US accent. I'm like, okay, well, let's do an exam preparation together. It's just to expose them to different accents. So if your learners struggle with your accent because your accent is quite regional or quite strong or different because they're used to only one accent because they've been tutored so far by one person, it's interesting for you to incorporate listening tests and passages into your lesson plans to help them improve those skills and be more open-minded and more receptive, because There are so many different accents in English, native and non-native, and we have to be able to understand them all. So that really helps. So exam preparation helps them with listening skills. It also helps them with speaking, because they're given a very short period of time to express themselves, and during that time they're not just scored on the pronunciation, they're also scored on density. So how much can I show within these 2, 3, 4 or 5 minutes? Can I show vocabulary? Can I show a variety of grammatical structures? What can I demonstrate? So that really pushes them to perfect and become more precise in English. And then what else? Reading. Reading is also a skill that people don't really enjoy. They'll often say, oh, reading is boring, it's really tedious, I'm not interested in this topic. And having them learn how to grasp the main idea, summarize, and despite the topic not being particularly interesting to them, really helps them also in the professional environment or at university when they're studying. So let's go back to that profile I mentioned before. Students of yours, so learners of English that haven't yet registered for the exam, but that have a rough idea of like when and why they want to take an exam, but they haven't yet committed. So those students still benefit from having a few quizzes, a few mock exams introduced in the curriculum. It helps them see what they need to work on next, and not just this vague idea of one day I will obtain that B2 certificate. So bit by bit, drip feed that information, make sure that they're getting used to the format and that they are focusing on things that they need and not just the things they enjoy, because lots of students will say, oh, let's do the listening practice, let's do the speaking practice. No, I don't like writing essays. No, reading passages are boring. So you have to make them work on all 4 skills. Otherwise, last minute, it's pretty impossible to suddenly improve one skill from scratch. So, help them across the board. It's beneficial, and it will really help them with motivation. If they see that they are improving the skills that they haven't particularly developed so far, that they don't particularly enjoy. So the 4 skills always are very important, although do bear in mind I'm talking about specific exams. I've mentioned the IELTS, I've mentioned the TEFL, the CAE, the FC, the CPE. There are exams, however, that don't focus on all 4 skills, so do bear that in mind. This is quite a general video. In this video also, I haven't mentioned the fact that there are exams for young learners also. I'm just talking about high-level exams, so B2 onwards, so exams that generally appeal more to adults. There are exams for kids too, which if you're interested in, you can do some research on. But in the meantime, I think the next step for you as a teacher in training would be to know more about the CFR, because all these exams and language learning in general is aligned with the CEFR, so the Common European Framework of Reference for Language. Now, the CEFR is what everybody refers to. It's the reference. It's the reference for language learning. So if I talk about A1, what is that? Well, that's the lower level. There are 6 levels, and the C, the lowest of 6. And then the C2 level is the highest. So A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. So you need to not only know what those levels are called, because they're not just called A1 or C2, they have other labels, other names. You have to also understand what's in those levels and how you can identify what a B2 is in terms of reading abilities, speaking abilities, writing and listening abilities. So always on those 4 skills and with those 6 levels, that's how you can identify a learner's level and a qualifications level. So that's that. So going back to what you should do next is go over the CFR and also have a look at the downloadable PDF, which is basically the different levels with the different qualifications, so different tables, so that you start understanding which exam is relevant to which learner. Because learners will come up to you and say, teacher, well, what exam should I sit? I've applied to this university and what should I do next? So it's important to know what the exams are for, and every time tell your learner, well, do find out directly with the university, because it changes from one year to the next. I once prepared a young lady for a bachelor's. So she was entering a UK university, and she had sat, I'm not going to name the exam, but she had sat an official EFL exam, and that university no longer accepted that exam. They wanted her to sit another exam. So very last minute, I had to prepare her for an equivalent. So it's not your responsibility to do that research. Your learner has to come to you. And this is, I'm talking in the context of private tutoring, and if you're the one telling the students what to study, some students will come to you knowing already. But if they don't, do get them to do the research and make sure they do register for the right exam. There's nothing worse than 1 month before the exam having someone panicking because they're like, oh my God, they don't accept this exam. I thought they did. And then they're like, why didn't you tell me? So, do help them do their research. And if they don't know where to look, it's very common for me to sit down with the learner and say, okay, what university you're applying for? Brilliant, let's have a look together. Oh yes, it is quite ambiguous. Let's phone them up and find out. And help them in that way. Your students will always appreciate that a helping hand from someone who can decipher all this jargon and help them also with the actual preparation.